All right, hello everyone. Welcome to my channel. This is an educational channel. We are attempting to shed light on different theories, different theories of everything, all-encompassing theories, systems of theory that are a little bit remote or obscure, that most people don't know anything about them, and they might be a little bit, challenging as well. Um, but in any case, usually the challenge is having to do with unlearning what you already learned, and the theory itself is actually relatively simple, but you have to unlearn the complicated thing that you already learned because it was forced down your throat when you were a kid, or possibly, up into your college years or your grad school years. And so unlearning is the hard part, and learning this stuff is usually relatively straightforward. Now, today is video number 263 on the reciprocal system of theory from Dewey Bernard Larson. And Mr. Larson lived from 1898 until 1990, and he had 92 years there to work out his theories, wrote a lot of books and articles, gave a lot of talks, developed a small following, and some of those folks are still kicking it, and I don't know how much content is being put out right now. We are actually looking at one of his revisers, followers and revisers, who just passed away a few years ago, and that is Dr. Bruce Perrett. And Dr. Perrett also wrote under the pen name of Daniel Phoenix III, and we're looking at some of his the Daniel papers. Now, the basic idea behind Larson's reciprocal system is that the universe is not made out of matter, and the universe is not made out of energy, but the universe is made out of motion. And motion is, for Larson, the relationship between space and time. In fact, in the first iterations of his theory, he actually called motion space-time, but then he changed the term to motion. Later in his career, he also summarized motion as just change in 3 dimensions. And the 3 dimensions is the first part of his first postulate. He came out with 2 fundamental postulates, and from that he derived an entire theoretical universe. And that first postulate says that space and time both have their coordinate aspects, meaning that space and time are both 3-dimensional, or they have that aspect anyway. Coordinate, meaning XYZ coordinates. And so space and time both have 3 dimensions. Space and time both have their scalar aspects as well, which means a progression that doesn't have a particular direction, a motion with no particular direction. This is the progression of time. Time is always getting later and later and later and later, but in no particular direction. And you can envision this as using a balloon with dots on it. You can just blow up the balloon. All the dots are moving away from each other, and but in no particular direction, or really all directions. And then space also has this scalar aspect. You can think of where time is always getting later and later and later, space is always getting farther and farther apart. That is the progression of space, and that was observed by the Hubble telescope back even before Larson's theory, back in the 1920s. All of the distant galaxies are moving away from each other. Then also space and time have their discrete units only. There is no minimum unit of space. You have to have at least one unit of space to have anything. You have to have at least one unit of time to have any time. If you don't have one unit of space, then you only have time. If you don't have one unit of time, then you only have space. The universe is made of motion, and so the universe is made of space and or time. And so it's got to be one or the other, or both. And so if you don't have any space, space is ruled out. So everything has to be time. So Larson has two sub-regions that he calls the space region and the time region. But also, if you have exactly one unit of space in one unit of time, then you have the speed of light. Speed is space divided by time. The bike is moving 20 miles per hour. And that is speed. 20 miles of space in 1 hour of time. So too, when you have one unit of space in one unit of time, you have the speed of light. So in Larson's system, the speed of light is the midpoint of the universe. He calls it unit speed. And unit is the midpoint in a reciprocal system, which is multiplicative and not additive. If you have an additive system like the legacy scientists, you have 0 in the middle, and then the positive would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and the negative would be negative 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But if you have a reciprocal system, 1 is at the center, and on the positive side you have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And on the negative, you have 1/2, 1/3, 1/4, 1/5, and 1/6. So the negative infinity is actually 0. So that is how a reciprocal system differs. And so the speed of light is the midpoint. And then there is an entire half of the universe that's moving faster than the speed of light, which is something that the legacy scientists knew nothing about. Evidenced by Einstein's dictum that the speed of light is the maximum speed of the universe, as entirely neglecting the half of the universe that Larson calls the cosmic sector. The other half of the universe is called the material sector, the half that's moving slower than the speed of light. And in that area, the legacy scientists have it pretty well mapped out. But what you can gain from the reciprocal system is that you can extrapolate from from the material sector to the cosmic sector simply by reversing the roles of space and time. So in the material sector, you have coordinate space, 3 dimensions of space, and clock time, progressing time, always getting later and later. In the cosmic sector, you have coordinate time, 3 or more dimensions of time, and clock space, progressing space. Space is always getting later and later and later. So that is the basic structure of the reciprocal system. Now, Larson took those initial postulates that he came up with in the late 1950s, and then he deduced a theoretical universe from those. And that's what he wrote his books about over the next 30 years. Wrote books on physics and chemistry and astronomy, and also some stuff on metaphysics, economics, and a few other topics. His followers followed up and extended this theory into other topics, and they quibbled about several aspects of Larson's theory that he didn't deduce properly. Larson admitted that he might not be deducing his theory properly. He said that the theory itself is correct. Whether I have applied the theory correctly is a different question, and I am subject to error. And the good thing, though, about my errors is that they will come out in the wash, and eventually people will recognize that I've made those errors and correct them. And Dr. Bruce Perret, along with Dr. KVK Nehru, made great strides toward correcting some of the shortcomings of Larson's system. Dr. Perret also delved into a lot of speculative areas, and we're going to be looking at that today. This is the first installment, first video that we've done on this one of the Daniel papers, which is called Extra-Dimensional and Extraterrestrial Entities. Introduction. This is not going to be a paper on who's who and what's that. There is already plenty of information available on various species of extra-dimensional and extraterrestrial entities. So rather than who or what they are, this paper focuses on why they are, a somewhat unexplored area that resulted from working with dimensional equations on Phoenix 3. Now, if you don't know, Phoenix 3 was the umbrella term for some of the top secret government black ops projects from the 1980s that included the Montauk Project on time travel. And so Daniel here, his pen name, claims to have been one of the young computer programmers on the Montauk Project. And you may know some of the others, such as Al Bielek, other people that have come out and written books and given interviews on the Montauk Project. Duncan Cameron. It's also the Philadelphia experiment was part of that, which is the time travel experiment that created this time loop between 1943 and 1983. And they took a ship and dematerialized it and rematerialized it 40 years apart, and drove a bunch of people insane and embedded a bunch of people in the hull of the ship, and all kinds of disasters happened. But who knows whether that's true or not, but that is the backdrop that Perret is writing here. Okay, so namely, 1, the structure of extra-dimensional life, discussing the concepts of dimension and density that define our biological structure here on Earth, projecting forward into higher dimensions. 2, how to interact with extraterrestrials, given the vast differences between us physically, psychologically, intellectually, and emotionally, even if we are of the same density. And 3, the next stage of mankind, ascension to extra-dimensional status. What is going to happen when we take the next evolutionary step? Okay, this section is called the yin-yang of time-space. When studying the relationships of space and time in the context of motion, it becomes obvious that we are talking about the same concept that the ancient Chinese philosophers were referring to with their concept of yin-yang. From the realm of normal observation, space is point-based, linear, meaning kick a ball, it rolls in a straight line, and yang. Time, being the conjugate of space, is plane-based, rather than point-based, rotational rather than linear, and yin. Clocks go in circles across their face. When reading on metaphysics, the term density and dimension are commonly used to refer to higher states of existence. For the most part, authors consider the terms interchangeable. For example, fourth dimensional or fourth density both refer to the next stage up for mankind, currently sitting at the third density or dimension. This is going to require some clarification, as dimensional structure is actually fixed, and it is what is active in those dimensions that creates the relative density, and as such, the question, or as such, the quantum ontology. And his footnote just says ontology is the study of the nature of existence. So a quantum ontology is a snazzy way to say levels of existence. Okay, this section is called dimension. Not dementia, but dimension. A property of space, extension in a given direction. That's the definition there from just dictionary.com. First word that jumps out is space from that definition. Now that we know about 3D time, we have to expand the definition of dimension to include temporal dimensions, dimensions of time. So let us generalize the relationship. Space and time are related as motion. So we are actually talking about dimensions of motion. And those dimensions have properties, properties of motion, not of just space or time. In space, we observe three dimensions: length, breadth, and height. Whereas space is only an aspect of motion, motion itself must have three dimensions for this to occur, and the other aspect, time, must also have three dimensions. Therefore, we can conclude by observation that there are only three dimensions. Now, that is something that I don't necessarily agree with, but perhaps he can convince me. Just because he gets this generally from KVK Nehru's article called Some Thoughts on Spin, which is has a section that's called Dimensionality of Space, provides a mathematical analysis of why only three independent dimensions exist. But if you look at Buckminster Fuller's work, he has kind of a 4D structure or tetrahedral coordinates for the same thing. Basically, you can take, for example, a box. Your box is your general XYZ coordinates. Each one of the, say if one of the corners of the box is at the origin, each one of the sides of the box would be one of the XYZ coordinates. But you can also take that box and basically draw an X on each face of the box. So a diagonal from one corner to the other corner of each face, and that defines a star tetrahedron. Okay, so a star tetrahedron takes up the same space as the box, and that is a four-dimensional array there. So, and that's what Buckminster Fuller uses to parse his universe, and so it would make sense to me that you could also, basically, in the same space that you have 3 dimensions, you also have 4 dimensions. And I know that Perret knew about that. So, I'm trying to kind of follow his derivation here, uh, so that I can see. I understand that Nehru has this equation. But I'm not exactly sure where Nehru got that equation from exactly. It's a very simple. I can't remember. Um, it's just. I'll have to look it up. I'll get back to you on that. Of course, minds are now racing, thinking this precludes 4D and 5D entities. Not the case. Is that label counting dimensions of motion or the dimensional aspects of motion? Question. Density. Definition: the state or quality of being dense. Compactness: closely set or crowded condition. Though the term density has been used in metaphysical contexts for centuries, it only became popular after the publication of it in the raw material. In that context, it refers to a discrete grouping of relative complexity. Third density refers to the current level of complexity that our biological organisms exist in, which is the 3 dimensions of space. To understand the concept of density, keep in mind the reciprocal relation between space and time. It is like a seesaw: more time, less space. As consciousness begins to expand into the temporal dimensions, it appears to compress and become more dense in a spatial sense. But the physical dimensions remain fixed due to the coordinate space they exist in. So what happens is you get a significantly higher amount of whatever in the same amount of space. More stuff in the same space equals the physical concept of higher density. Okay, now the next section is called time and relative dimensions in equivalent space. And just to okay, I guess he doesn't have a definition here for equivalent space, but equivalent space is basically, the concept is that we only see space. We do not see time. The only way we see time is by how it affects space. Because we are situated, our senses are situated in the material sector. And so we see space, but we don't see time. We see time by how it affects space. An analogy here would be like iron filings. We don't see a magnetic field, but we see how magnetic iron filings align themselves in a magnetic field. And so we see how the magnetic field affects space. And so that is equivalent space. It's the equivalent of space, which is time, but we see it as time. Same with a white dwarf star. A white dwarf star in the reciprocal system is a star that has gone nova, exploded. So the star has exploded, but the explosion has been so powerful that the explosion occurs in time rather than space, meaning that it goes beyond the speed of light. And so an explosion that is beyond the speed of light goes into the cosmic sector, and it becomes an explosion in space, in time rather than in space. But we don't see time. So an explosion in time we see as an implosion in space by the reciprocal postulate. And so an implosion in space means that the star contracts and becomes super small and super dense, like a white dwarf star. So that's another idea there of equivalent space. I'm sure that Dr. Perrett will explain it better than I just did there as we move on. But we're going to stop here for today and start up with this next section tomorrow. So thanks for tuning in and have a great day.